Do you have a child or a client with autism who needs to learn actions, and you also want to learn more about how to collaborate with an SLP, a speech and language pathologist? Today, I'm talking to my good friend, Rose Griffin, who's both a speech pathologist and a board certified behavior analyst. We talk about actions and using her product, which is the Action Builder cards. And we also talk about how to get your speech pathologist who's on your team on the same page to help your child. So let's get to this really great interview with Rose Griffin. Okay, I am so excited to have my good friend Rose Griffin here to do another video with me. Thank you for joining us, Rose.
Well, thanks for having me. I can't wait to chat today.
Yeah, I feel like we've been at this for a very long time, both in
Yes.
very similar capacities now. And you did a couple of the podcasts already for Turn Autism Around. So I know you're on episode 10 because I had that memorized because it was, very early on. And there you get into more of your background. So people that really are interested in your background can go to listen to episode 10, which we can link below. But why don't you give our new listeners and those that don't know you just a very quick 2-minute synopsis of your fall into the autism world?
Absolutely. So I'm a speech language pathologist, and I've been doing that 20 years. And I started in the field, and I loved working with all clients, but especially my autistic learners. And so I had so much joy in that. My second year, I worked at the Cleveland Clinic, which has an ABA focus. And I was like, wow, you can help students who are 18 and have no way to speak, and preschoolers who have no way to speak. You can help them find their voice. And that really inspired me. And I took all the requirements to become a BCBA. And so I've been duly certified as a speech therapist and a BCBA for 12 years, one of less than 515 people now who are duly certified in the entire world. And from that very specific way to help my clients and professionals, I started my own company called ABA Speech about 6 years ago. And so I also have a podcast and courses and a lot of the same things that you do. And I really just try to share and disseminate information about autism and communication.
Yeah, and you've gotten really big in the online space as well. And we serve pretty similar people. I think I'm a little bit more focused to parents, but I also have BCBAs and SLPs, and then you're a little bit more focused to SLPs and BCBAs, but you do have some parents. So very similar, and very similar approaches. Rose took my courses early on, and I've been on her podcast, and we collaborate all the time. And in the online space, people say, well, aren't we competitors? And it's like, I heard this once, like, the only competitor is someone that doesn't know that you should be collaborating together. And like, we're both on this huge mission to like get good therapy out to the world. And so I really appreciate your friendship and you coming on and us supporting each other in our pursuit to get this information out there. So I don't even think you said this, but you also developed a couple products. The first one that I know about is the Action Builder cards, which are excellent. We can link this in the show notes. You can get these on Amazon or through your website directly, right, Rose?
Directly through my website is the main way that we're selling them now. Okay. And actually they're on sale. So yes, click the link. We're going to talk about them. I'm excited to share about them. And that is the reason I started my whole business, is because of this product and just helping autistic learners generalize their language skills, because we know that's one thing that students really have a hard time with. So
yeah. So I know when I was in schools and in homes and the speech therapists would come, they always had the best materials. So you must have found a hole in the materials to have pursued creating these materials, right?
Absolutely. What was happening is I was working in a school and a ABA clinic, and I was doing trainings for RBTs, parapros on how to make specific flashcards for students using Google Images. Because what happens usually in therapy materials is there's one picture of eating, there's one picture of playing, there's one picture of washing, and then professionals will show kids that one picture. And so they're not really planning for generalization. We always say that in the field. We don't want to hope for generalization or pray that it occurs, because it won't. Newsflash. We really have to have that planning up front. And so the action builder cards has 13 different actions. There's 100 cards, and there's many different exemplars.
So I have the product right here. So here's blowing, and those of you listening, I'll describe the pictures, but a boy blowing bubbles. On the back too is nice because it's blowing bubbles is together. The boy is blowing bubbles and he is blowing bubbles, depending on the child's language. And then we have a little girl blowing out birthday candles on a cake, a little girl blowing a kiss, a boy blowing out the candles, a girl blowing bubbles, and a boy blowing a kiss. And they're different, different children, different situations. And then the same thing for brushing and building and carrying, and like Rose said. So let's talk about teaching actions. I know I did a video blog on this years ago that's still very popular. And I think people do get stuck. And I'm like a big proponent on being super, super careful when we're trying to help kids who have 1-word utterances, 2-word utterances, not adding carrier phrases. Like I have some specific things that I do. And I think actions are one of the best ways to get your nouns and your reinforcement, items, and mommy and daddy and spot the dog and your favorite toys and reinforcers, get the nouns, and then start building actions. I mean, you're obviously more of an expert on actions than I am. So what are your thoughts? What do you see? What are some mistakes, and how would you recommend teaching actions?
Yeah, I like to teach actions starting with just the single word first and labeling just the single action. I think that's really important. And we always want to think about, and that's what makes therapy so hard, is it has to be really individualized. So if you have a student who is older and maybe they're washing dishes at home, that might be a good one to start with. But if you have somebody who's really little and maybe they like eating their snack or lunch, that's fun for them, maybe we start with eating. So it has to be really individualized. And I think we just start with whatever the main actions are. Another kind of advanced tip is maybe holding up the picture and not saying what are they doing, just holding up the picture and having the student label the action specifically. Because what we're always striving for every single student is that they will initiate the communication interaction. We don't want our students to be prompt dependent. I know you probably talk about that a lot on all of your videos, but we want to make sure that we're not always the one initiating the communicative interaction, because we know a lot of students who are autistic can become prompt dependent. So I think starting with those really core actions, and then once a student has all those different actions, I always say my most important job when I'm acting as a speech therapist, and really anything I do, because this is kind of my personality, is making sure that I collaborate with the entire team. So the team knows, well, what actions are we working on, and how can those be generalized to preschool or the home environment or grandma? And I get a lot of emails from all different types of family members wanting to help their autistic family members start communicating and on their communication journey. So starting with the single action, and then once they have the single action, then we go into a 2-word phrase. So let's say that we have a younger learner and we work on eating, and you had talked about like, oh, we did all these nouns and the student knows how to label all their preferred foods or whatever it is. And so then we start labeling the action with the noun. And we start with those nouns the student already has. And then that way we can see that growth in their spontaneous vocabulary. And if we're really individualized and we start with preferences, things that are in the student's environment as well, then the student's going to have more opportunities to spontaneously communicate. I do a lot of consulting. Actually, people that go through your membership, sometimes then they contact me and say, hey, can you do some consultation? And I say, of course. And I have a great family I'm working with now that I think are in your membership. And they said, our child has 300 tags or 300 labels. And I said, well, how often is he spontaneously using those? And it got really quiet because the student isn't. So we really want to be cognizant when we're picking targets that we're going to be working on with our students, that they're things that can touch that reinforcement and can be embedded within the student's functional day.
Yeah, and do you agree that we should start with single words that are nouns, not actions, or would you start with actions?
I like to start with nouns. I do, because what I always say is, and when I consult too in schools, when I worked in Austin, Texas, with Kelly Rich down at CTAC, I would go into 35 different schools in Leander ISD. It was a really cool job, kind of setting me up for what I do now. And I would see people working on, very general nouns. And that's not what we want to do. Or we're going to label bathroom and spoon first, but the student can't use any spoons to eat, and the student's on a toileting schedule. These are things we don't want to do. So we're working on nouns, and I can see how people make that mistake, because they're like, well, gosh, bathroom, I mean, that's important. And spoon, I mean, he's working with the OT on that. But what I always do is I start on labeling the most preferred things, usually nouns, because labeling is really hard for students who are not yet speaking. And that's really the audience that I talk about most, even though I serve all different types of learners. But my online business, that's what I talk about. And so something that's so hard for our students in the field of ABA, we talk about not having a lot of response effort. So we want to start with things the students love and enjoy.
Right. So I just have some stuff laying around. Bubbles. That's
Yes.
a noun. That's something
Yes.
that, but right away, what mistakes I see is open bubbles and blow bubbles
Right.
and then, water is another one. So water, but we have to get the nouns straight. I made this mistake. So Lucas, when he was little, my son, he liked stuff out like in the cabinet, the snack cabinet. So I would prompt open cabinet, right? But then when he'd want the bottle opened, he'd say open cabinet.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
yes.
that's where I see the mistakes, especially with words like open. It gets prompted right away, prompted in a sentence. So I like to teach nouns first, and then when you're ready for actions, and not just pictures, there's also ongoing actions. Do you want to tell our listeners what ongoing actions is and where you put it in the mix?
Yeah, so I'll write that for students where they'll label an action that's actually taking place or that has just taken place. And I think that's important too. And we kind of just want to think about how can we embed communication across a learner's day. And that communication isn't something that just happens when the student's with a speech therapist or when the student's with a BCBA, is we really have to holistically think about what are the family routines, what does the student's entire day look like, and how are these things important for supporting that student. And the past 10 years before I stepped away from my time in the public schools, I worked with students in middle school and high school level, and those students really had high support needs and they were not yet speaking, or they're using single words. Well, there might be some students who are in high school and adults and they're still using single to two words. And I say, oh, it's so very important. Now we pick really important targets for those students. And that's okay that they may never get to the sentence level, but we want to make sure that what we're talking about is important to their everyday life. So they're vocation sampling, or they're, doing something like that, or going to story time, whatever their age, we need to make sure that the examples that we pick are important for our individual student. That's why what we do by sharing information is so very important. When we were talking the other day, when you were on my podcast, you really have to find your local providers, right? Where you can have all this great information and the parents can steer the ship and all the words that you use, which I love, but we really have to get the boots on the ground, local people in the trenches to be really cognizant and thinking about how individualized these targets need to be, because that's going to help your child become a spontaneous communicator, whatever they're using, one word, sentences, and that's going to be important for them across the lifespan.
Yeah, which is a good segue into the next little chunk I want to cover. And you being both an SLP and a BCBA is really such a great combo. And Kelsey and I, a couple of weeks ago, we did a podcast on how to find good therapy. And a lot of times, at least with the online participants that I interact with, a lot of times the SLP, the speech language pathologist, or the speech therapist, whatever you want to call that person, is taking an important role. But a lot of times they have a traditional background that they go from, right away pairing open bubbles and blow bubbles and, carrier phrases and teaching colors and, prepositions and pronouns and some versus one versus all, which was in Lucas's 2-year-old goals, how can we, because you said yourself, which I totally agree, we have to find local providers who can help us. I was talking to someone that was just on my podcast, Emily, who I had done a one-to-one coaching call with, and she had an SLP who was coming every other week, but she didn't feel like she was adding anything. So I said, well, why don't you talk to her about articulation and our number one words and our number two words and help her, but like, how do we find, finding an SLP that's completely up to speed with where you and I are is going to be like finding a needle in a haystack. But we don't need to find an amazing, well-trained person. Like, how can families and other professionals help the SLP catch up to where we're at so that they're not making these speech mistakes?
I think it's a great question. Everybody's going to come with a different set. What's hard is that there is a big anti-ABA sentiment in the SLP world. So that's really hard. So you kind of have to gauge where a person is. But I really think most SLPs, we go to school for 6 years. So it's very hard to get into graduate school. It's very hard to be an SLP. So these people are very, very professional. I think that what happens is that sometimes they feel like their expertise isn't being listened to. And I think you really just have to try to build that cohesive team, and you really have to work on that collaboration. And so I talk to speech therapists and BCBAs and parents who are having trouble with that collaborative piece. But I think just talking with the speech language pathologist, asking them what they're doing and the reasoning why, I think is important. When I was seeing clients in the home, I had students that were also in ABA, and they wanted their preschool child to be strapped into a high chair, and for me to see the student that way. And I really had to advocate for, that's not how I do things, and I can't make your child communicate, but I wanted to be sensitive to them because they're the parent, even though that is wrong. That is not the right way to do just general speech therapy. And so I just always talked about exactly what I was doing. So I think if you have somebody, making sure to maybe sit in on the sessions and or ask for a note and or work with your public school speech therapist. There's actually a lot that a parent can do. They can observe in the school, even though they may tell you that you're not allowed. That is your right, because I worked in a very affluent and contentious district for 10 years, and we had parents that would observe. And you really just have to know exactly what's going on and try to build that communication loop. And that's really just the most important thing. And listening to somebody and hoping that there's somebody who's able to collaborate. And if not, that person might be doing more harm than good. You might need to find somebody else.
Yeah. And sending some videos like the Action video blog or a podcast from Rose or my Turn Autism Around book, or just something little like on carrier phrases, or setting goals that are the child will talk in 4-word utterances, or, if you can search Mary Barbera plus your topic, you could probably find something short. But you have to be sensitive because like Rose said, these people are very well trained. And I don't know, I know kind of the poor man's articulation of just being common sense, like don't string big sentences together,
right.
Articulation crash. But I don't know where the tongue goes for an ah versus an a, and and we really need that expertise, but we really need to catch people up fairly quickly, and we need to value them. So
it's very, very nuanced. It's very, very nuanced.
And that's
it is. And that's what I always say, it's a science and an art, just like therapy is. And that's what I'm so proud of at ABA Speech. We offer professional development for speech therapists and BCBAs, because some speech therapists, they want to learn, or maybe they're working in an ABA center, or they're new to something. And a lot of the things that I talk about, I did not learn in graduate school. This is all stuff that I learned out in the field because I've always chosen to work at ABA clinics and public schools and bringing my kind of expertise and knowledge there to a least restrictive environment. So you can definitely learn and take CEUs as well that we offer to help with the training component.
And you have a membership site now for SLPs and BCBAs, and they can get both their credits for BCBA credits as well as for ASHA. So you really are one of the very unique people in the world that can serve speech pathologists who want to learn more about ABA and BCBAs who want to learn more about speech, which is a great combo. So abaspeech.org is Rose's website. You can find out all the information about her membership and action builder cards and consultations. If, we have people that, come through my course who do want consultations. I've started offering just very, very few one-to-one coaching sessions, but it's not consultation. I'm not providing what Rose can provide. And then we are also just starting group coaching. We're going to try that out, where we're going to give more help to people who really want to dig in deep, because we can sit here and talk and, start with blowing and but then when you couple in problem behaviors and potty training and picky eating and the family dynamics and preschool, and it's complicated. It is complicated. And the more you can listen and learn and read and put it together, I think the better we all will do, and not waste a lot of time on making mistakes. Because I know I made tons of speech mistakes with Lucas and with other clients until I learned. Absolutely. These kids can be very tricky, right?
Yes. And that's great, because I think the thing too is you want to have a sounding board. It's one thing to learn information, but that's what we've been doing with the ABA Speech Connection, is just actually tonight we have this monthly live Q&A where people log on. It's just neat to hear what other people are doing in their therapy and what questions they have, and making sure that we're not learning alone, because that makes you smarter to use everybody, what they're doing in therapy, and to be able to transform your therapy for whether it's your client or your own child.
Awesome. Well, let's wrap up. But before I let you go, part of my podcast goals are not to just help the kids, but help the parents and professionals listening be less stressed. And I know you have 3 kids. Yes. You are very busy. So what are your self-care tips or stress management tools that you use that might help somebody else? This
past year, I really started loving reformer Pilates.
I just started that too.
Oh, did you? Yeah. So we have a studio right in my hometown. So it's 5 minutes away, which is really good for the family schedule and work schedule. And I just love it. It's amazing. It's low impact and it is good for you. Mind, body, everything. So try that if you haven't. Yeah,
we just they just opened one 5 minutes from my house too. I'm going today. So
nice.
I can't say that I love it yet. I just started, but at least I'm going.
Yes.
But no, I love that. And you've always been great with exercise and your health. So yes. I love that. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I'm so thankful for our friendship.
Same. See ya.